The blood had already soaked through Amelia Reed's sleeve by the time she stumbled through the door of Dr. Harrison's office in Desdemona, Texas, clutching her arm with trembling fingers while the midday sun of June, 1883, beat down mercilessly outside. Dr. Harrison looked up from his desk, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose, and his expression hardened the moment he saw her dusty traveling dress and worn boots. Amelia had been trying to make it to San Antonio, where her aunt lived, but her stagecoach had overturned 15 miles outside of town, and a piece of splintered wood had torn through her arm when she'd been thrown against the side. The other passengers had helped her onto a horse, pointing her toward Desdemona, assuring her the doctor would fix her right up. "Please," Amelia said, her voice barely above a whisper as pain radiated up her arm. "I need help. The wound, it won't stop bleeding." Dr. Harrison stood slowly, walking around his desk with measured steps. He examined her from a distance, his eyes moving from her pale face to the blood-soaked fabric wrapped around her upper arm. "Let me see it," he said curtly. Amelia unwrapped the makeshift bandage with shaking hands, revealing a deep gash that ran nearly 6 inches along her forearm. The edges were ragged, and the blood flowed steadily, dripping onto his clean wooden floor. She swayed slightly, feeling lightheaded from the loss of blood and the long ride into town. The doctor looked at the wound with a clinical eye, then stepped back. "That needs stitching. Probably 10 or 12 at least. I'll need to clean it first, make sure there's no debris inside. The whole treatment will cost you $15. $15. The words hit Amelia like a physical blow. She had exactly $3.20 in her pocket, money she'd been saving for months to make this journey. Everything else had been in her trunk, which had broken open when the stagecoach crashed, scattering her belongings across the Texas prairie. "I don't have $15, Amelia said, hating the desperation that crept into her voice. "But I have $3 now, and I can send you the rest once I reach my aunt in San Antonio. She'll help me, I promise. Please, I just need you to stop the bleeding." Dr. Harrison's face remained impassive. "I don't run a charity, miss. This is a business. No money, no treatment. Those are the rules." He walked back to his desk and sat down, picking up his pen as if she'd already left. "But I'm bleeding," Amelia said, her voice rising with panic. "I could die from this." "Then I suggest you find someone willing to pay your bill," the doctor replied without looking up. "There's a bank down the street if you're looking for a loan, though I doubt they'll give one to a woman traveling alone with no collateral." Amelia felt tears prick at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wrapped her arm back up as best she could with one hand, the fabric immediately blooming red again. The room tilted slightly, and she grabbed the doorframe to steady herself. She couldn't believe this was happening. She'd heard stories of people being turned away from doctors back east, but she'd always thought they were exaggerations, cautionary tales meant to scare people into saving money. She stumbled out into the bright sunlight, the heat immediately oppressive after the relative cool of the doctor's office. Main Street stretched before her, a wide dirt road lined with wooden buildings that had that raw, unfinished look of a town still finding its footing. Desdemona had sprung up around the cattle trails and the promise of oil, and it had the rough, temporary feeling of a place where people came to make their fortune and move on. Amelia didn't know where to go. The bank seemed pointless. The doctor was right about that. She had no family here, no friends, no one who would vouch for her. She leaned against the post outside the doctor's office, trying to gather her strength and figure out what to do next. The blood was seeping through the bandage again, and she felt cold despite the Texas heat. Across the street, Brandt Quinn had just finished loading supplies into the back of a wagon when he noticed the woman slumped against the post. At 26 years old, Brandt had been working as a cowboy for nearly a decade, ever since his parents had died and left him to make his own way in the world. He'd been delivering cattle to market when he'd stopped in Desdemona to pick up supplies for the ranch where he worked. The Double J spread about 20 miles north of town. Something about the way the woman was holding herself caught his attention. She looked like she was about to collapse, and even from across the street, he could see the red stain spreading down her arm. Brandt tied off the wagon and crossed the street in long strides, his boots kicking up dust. "Madam, are you all right?" he asked as he approached, though the answer was obviously no. Amelia looked up at him, seeing a tall man with sun-weathered skin, dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his hat, and eyes that were a striking shade of blue-gray. He had the lean, muscular build of someone who worked hard for a living, and there was genuine concern in his expression. "I've been better," she managed, trying to smile but failing. "I had an accident and I need a doctor, but I don't have enough money for treatment." Brandt frowned, looking at her arm. "Harrison turned you away," she nodded. "That bastard," Brandt muttered under his breath. He'd heard stories about the doctor refusing care before, but seeing it firsthand made his blood boil. "Let me talk to him." "He won't listen," Amelia said wearily. "He made it very clear. No money, no treatment." Brandt looked at her for a long moment, taking in her pale face and the way she was struggling to stay upright. He made a decision in that instant, the kind of quick, instinctive choice that he'd learned to trust during his years working cattle and dealing with emergencies on the range. "How much does he want?" Brandt asked. $15, Amelia said. "But I can't take money from a stranger." "I don't even know you." "Name's Brandt Quinn," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "And you're going to bleed to death if someone doesn't stitch that arm up properly. Come on." He didn't wait for her to argue, just turned and walked back into the doctor's office with a determined stride. Amelia followed, not sure what else to do. Her arm throbbed with each heartbeat, and the edges of her vision were starting to go fuzzy. Dr. Harrison looked up with annoyance when his door opened again. His expression changed slightly when he saw Brandt. "Mr. Quinn, what can I do for you?" "You can treat this woman's arm," Brandt said, his voice hard. "I'll pay the $15. The doctor's eyebrows rose. "You're paying for her treatment. Do you know her?" "Does that matter?" Brandt shot back. "You wanted money for the treatment. I'm offering it. Now are you going to help her or not?" Dr. Harrison studied them both for a moment, then shrugged. "Your money's as good as anyone else's. Have her sit on the examination table." Brandt guided Amelia to the table, his hand gentle on her good arm. She sat down heavily, relief and confusion warring in her chest. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered to him. "Because it's the right thing to do," Brandt replied simply. "And because I've got two good hands and a strong back. I can work double shifts to make up the money. Your life's worth more than a few extra hours of work." His words were so straightforward, so matter-of-fact, that Amelia felt tears spring to her eyes again. This time she didn't hold them back. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. The doctor cleared his throat. "I'll need you both to step back. This is going to take some time." "I'm staying," Brandt said firmly, moving to stand near the wall where he could see but wouldn't be in the way. Amelia was grateful for his presence as the doctor finally began to work. He cleaned the wound first, and the pain was so intense that she had to bite down on a leather strap he gave her to keep from screaming. Brandt watched with a clenched jaw, his hands balled into fists at his sides. When the doctor began stitching, Amelia focused on Brandt's face instead of the needle pulling through her skin. He gave her an encouraging nod, and somehow that small gesture helped more than anything else could have. The entire procedure took nearly an hour. By the time Dr. Harrison tied off the last stitch and wrapped her arm in clean bandages, Amelia was exhausted and drenched in sweat. But the bleeding had stopped, and the sharp pain had dulled to a manageable ache. "Keep that clean and dry," the doctor instructed, already washing his hands at the basin in the corner. "Come back in a week to have the stitches checked. That'll be another $2 for the follow-up visit." Brandt pulled out his leather wallet and counted out the bills, placing them on the doctor's desk. Amelia watched, feeling overwhelmed by the debt she now owed this stranger. $17 was more than a month's wages for many people, and he'd handed it over without hesitation. As they walked back out into the afternoon sunlight, Amelia felt steadier on her feet, though still weak. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "I'll pay you back every cent, I swear it, once I get to my aunt's house in San Antonio." "Don't worry about it right now," Brandt said, though his tone was kind rather than dismissive. "Where are you staying tonight? Do you have a place?" Amelia's heart sank as she realized she hadn't thought that far ahead. She'd planned to take the evening stage to San Antonio, but in her current condition, she knew she wasn't strong enough to travel. "I suppose I'll need to find a hotel," she said slowly. "Though most of my money is gone now, and I used almost all the rest on the doctor." She trailed off, doing quick mental calculations. She had maybe $2 left to her name, and she wasn't even sure how much a hotel room would cost in Desdemona. Brandt ran a hand through his hair, thinking. "The boarding house on 3rd Street is run by Mrs. Chen. She's fair with her prices. A room there should be about 4 bits a night." He pulled out another dollar from his wallet. "Here, this should cover you for a couple nights until you're strong enough to travel." "No," Amelia said firmly, though it pained her to refuse. "You've done too much already. I can't keep taking your money. You said you'd have to work double to pay for my medical care as it is." "And I meant it," Brandt replied. "But what good does it do to get your arm fixed if you end up sleeping in the street and getting an infection? Take the money. You can pay me back when you're able." Amelia looked at him for a long moment, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't doing this to gain anything from her or to hold it over her head later. He was simply a good man doing what he thought was right, and that realization made her chest tighten with emotion. "Thank you," she said again, taking the dollar with her good hand. "I promise I'll pay back every cent. Could I get your address, so I know where to send the money when I can?" Brandt nodded. "I work at the Double J Ranch about 20 miles north of here. You can send letters to the ranch and they'll get to me." "The Double J," Amelia repeated, committing it to memory. "And your name is Brandt Quinn." "That's right." He smiled at her for the first time, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and more approachable. "And you are Amelia Reed," she replied, offering her good hand for a shake. His grip was warm and calloused, the hand of someone who worked hard every day. "I'm originally from Louisiana, but I'm traveling to San Antonio to stay with my aunt." "Long journey," Brandt observed. "Especially traveling alone." "My parents passed last winter," Amelia explained, the words still difficult to say even months later. "Influenza took them both within a week of each other. I've been working as a seamstress in New Orleans, but my aunt wrote and said she could use help with her boarding house in San Antonio. It seemed like a good opportunity for a fresh start." Brandt's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry about your parents. Lost mine when I was 16 to a barn fire. It's not an easy thing." "No," Amelia agreed quietly. "It's not." They stood there for a moment in the afternoon heat, two strangers bonded by loss and unexpected kindness. Then Brandt cleared his throat and gestured down the street. "Let me walk you to Mrs. Chen's place. You shouldn't be wandering around town in your condition." Amelia wanted to protest that she could manage on her own, but the truth was that she felt weak and disoriented, and the idea of having someone guide her was deeply appealing. "All right," she agreed. "Thank you." The boarding house was a two-story wooden structure that looked more solid and well-maintained than many of the other buildings in town. A hand-painted sign reading "Chen's Boarding House" hung above the door, and flower boxes beneath the windows added a touch of color to the dusty street. Mrs. Chen herself answered the door, a petite Chinese woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She looked from Brandt to Amelia, taking in the bandaged arm and pale face. "She needs a room," Brandt said without preamble. "She's been injured and can't travel for a few days." Mrs. Chen nodded briskly. "Ground floor room is 50 cents a night, includes breakfast. Dinner is another 2 bits if she wants it." "I'll take the room," Amelia said quickly, already reaching for her money. "Just the room for now, thank you, Mrs. Chen took the coins and gestured for them to follow her inside. The interior of the boarding house was clean and simply furnished, with a parlor to the left and a dining room to the right. A staircase led to the upper floor, but Mrs. Chen guided them down a short hallway to a door near the back of the house. "This is the room," she said, unlocking the door and pushing it open. "Clean sheets, clean water in the pitcher. Privy is out back. You need anything else, you come find me." The room was small but tidy, with a single bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a small chest of drawers. A window looked out onto a garden where vegetables grew in neat rows. "It's perfect," Amelia said sincerely. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen." The older woman nodded and left, her footsteps quiet in the hallway. Brandt lingered in the doorway, clearly wanting to make sure Amelia was settled but also aware that it wouldn't be proper for him to enter her room. "You should rest," he said. "You've lost a lot of blood. Try to eat something if you can keep it down and drink plenty of water." "I will," Amelia promised. She hesitated, then added, "When do you leave for the ranch?" "I was planning to head back this afternoon," Brandt admitted, "but I can stay another hour or so, make sure you're all right." "No, you should go," Amelia said, even though part of her wanted him to stay. "You've done so much already, and I'm sure they're expecting you back at the ranch. I'll be fine here." Brandt looked uncertain but finally nodded. "All right, but I'll be back in town in about a week. I'll check on you then, see if you need anything else before you continue your journey." "You don't have to do that," Amelia said. "I know," Brandt replied, "but I'm going to anyway." He tipped his hat to her one more time and then turned and walked away, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Amelia stood in the doorway of her room and watched him go, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and something else she couldn't quite name. He'd swept into her life like a whirlwind, solving her immediate crisis with such easy competence that it almost seemed unreal. She closed the door and sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly aware of just how exhausted she was. Her arm throbbed steadily beneath the bandages, and her whole body ached from the stagecoach crash and its aftermath. She lay down carefully, trying not to jostle her injured arm, and stared at the ceiling. The events of the day played through her mind on repeat. The crash, the desperate ride to town, Dr. Harrison's cold refusal, and then Brandt appearing like some kind of guardian angel. She'd never met anyone quite like him, someone who would help a stranger so completely without expecting anything in return. In New Orleans, people looked out for their own and viewed everyone else with suspicion. Kindness usually came with strings attached. But Brandt had asked for nothing except that she take care of herself. He'd given her money not once but twice, promised to work double to make up the cost, and made sure she had a safe place to stay. And he'd done it all with such straightforward sincerity that it was impossible to doubt his motives. Amelia closed her eyes, intending to rest for just a few minutes, but exhaustion pulled her into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke hours later to find the room dim with twilight. Her arm ached fiercely and she felt hot and disoriented. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was, and panic fluttered in her chest. Then the events of the day came back to her, and she forced herself to take slow, steady breaths. A soft knock came at her door. "Miss Reed, are you awake?" It was Mrs. Chen's voice. Amelia sat up carefully, her head spinning slightly. "Yes, I'm awake." The door opened and Mrs. Chen entered carrying a tray. "I brought you some broth and bread. Mr. Quinn paid for it before he left. He said you needed to eat." Amelia's throat tightened with emotion. Of course he had. That was very kind of him. Mrs. Chen set the tray on the chest of drawers and studied Amelia with a critical eye. "You have fever. You look flushed." Amelia touched her own forehead with her good hand. Her skin did feel warm, but she wasn't sure if that was fever or just the lingering effects of the day's trauma. "I don't know, maybe a little." "I bring you willow bark tea," Mrs. Chen decided. "Help with fever and pain. You drink it." She left before Amelia could respond, returning a few minutes later with a cup of steaming tea that smelled bitter and earthy. Amelia drank it obediently, grimacing at the taste but grateful for the relief it might bring. The broth was simple but flavorful, and Amelia managed to eat most of it along with half the bread before her stomach started to protest. She felt better with food in her belly, more grounded and present. Mrs. Chen collected the tray and the empty teacup, giving her one more assessing look before nodding in apparent satisfaction. "You rest more," the older woman instructed. "Tomorrow you feel better." Amelia hoped she was right. She changed into her nightgown with difficulty, managing the buttons one-handed, and climbed back into bed. The willow bark tea was already working, dulling the edge of the pain in her arm and making her feel pleasantly drowsy. She fell asleep more easily this time, and her dreams were full of blue-gray eyes and a voice saying, "I'll work double." The next morning, Amelia woke feeling marginally better. Her arm still hurt, but the pain was more manageable, and the fever that had threatened last night seemed to have broken. She washed as best she could with one hand, changed into her spare dress, which thankfully had been in the small bag she'd been carrying rather than her lost trunk, and made her way to the dining room for the included breakfast. Several other boarders were already seated at the long table, and they looked up with curiosity when she entered. Mrs. Chen appeared from the kitchen carrying plates of eggs and bacon, nodding at Amelia to take a seat. "You're the girl from the stagecoach accident," one of the men said. He was older, probably in his 50s, with gray hair and a weathered face. "Heard about that. Lucky you survived with just an injured arm." "Very lucky," Amelia agreed, sitting down carefully. "The driver wasn't so fortunate. He broke his leg." "Axle broke is what I heard," another boarder chimed in, a younger man who looked like a ranch hand. "Company's been cutting corners on maintenance. It was bound to happen eventually." They spent the rest of breakfast discussing the accident and the general poor state of the stagecoach lines in that part of Texas. Amelia contributed what she could to the conversation, but mostly she listened, learning about the town and the surrounding area. Desdemona was bigger than she'd initially thought, with nearly 300 permanent residents, and dozens more who passed through following the cattle trails or working the oil fields that had recently opened up to the east. After breakfast, Amelia went back to her room and tried to figure out what to do next. She needed to get word to her aunt that she'd been delayed, but she wasn't sure how long she'd need to stay in Desdemona. Dr. Harrison had said to come back in a week to check the stitches, and she knew she needed to follow that advice. The last thing she wanted was for the wound to become infected. That meant at least a week in town, possibly longer depending on how well she healed. She counted her remaining money carefully. She had about $1.70 left after paying for her room last night. That would cover 3 more nights at the boarding house if she didn't eat dinner, which meant she'd run out of money with 4 days still to go before she could see the doctor again. The realization made her stomach sink. She'd have to find some way to earn money, and quickly. She was a skilled seamstress, but would anyone in Desdemona need her services? And could she even sew with one arm bandaged? Amelia decided to explore the town and see what opportunities might be available. She walked slowly up Main Street, taking in the various businesses. There was a general store, a bank, a saloon, a livery stable, a blacksmith shop, and several other establishments. Near the end of the street, she spotted a small shop with a sign reading Miller's Dry Goods and Tailoring. Hope flickered in her chest. She pushed open the door, making the bell above it jingle, and found herself in a cluttered space filled with bolts of fabric, spools of thread, and partially finished garments hanging from every available surface. A woman emerged from the back room, probably in her 40s, with graying brown hair pulled back in a severe bun and spectacles perched on her nose. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone professional but not unfriendly. "I hope so," Amelia said. "My name is Amelia Reed and I'm a seamstress. I'm stuck in town for at least a week, and I was wondering if you might need any help. I'm good with both simple mending and more complex work like dressmaking." Mrs. Miller looked her up and down, her eyes lingering on the bandaged arm. "What happened to you?" "Stagecoach accident," Amelia explained. "But I can still work. I can pin fabric and cut patterns with one hand, and I can do simple stitching if the garment is braced properly." The older woman considered this, then gestured to a pile of clothes on a nearby table. "I'm behind on my mending orders. Nothing fancy, just torn seams and missing buttons mostly. If you can do that kind of work one-handed, I'll pay you 10 cents a garment. You'd have to work here in the shop, though. I can't let you take the clothes with you." 10 cents a garment wasn't much, but if Amelia could complete enough of them, she could make up the money she needed for the boarding house and maybe even start paying back Brandt. "That sounds fair," she said. "When can I start?" "Right now if you want," Mrs. Miller said. "I'll set you up at the work table in the back. There's good light back there." Amelia spent the rest of the day bent over the work table, carefully mending torn shirts and trousers. It was slow going with only one hand fully functional, but she managed to complete 8 garments by the time the light started to fade. Mrs. Miller inspected each one carefully before nodding in approval. "You do good work," she said, paying Amelia 80 cents. "Come back tomorrow if you want more." "I will," Amelia promised, pocketing the coins gratefully. "Thank you for giving me a chance." She walked back to the boarding house feeling tired but accomplished. With the money she'd earned today, she could afford another night at the boarding house and maybe a simple dinner. If she could keep up this pace, she might actually be able to support herself until she was well enough to travel. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Amelia would wake up, eat the breakfast included with her room, walk to Mrs. Miller's shop, and spend the day mending clothes. Her arm ached constantly, but she pushed through the discomfort, driven by the need to be self-sufficient. Mrs. Miller proved to be a fair employer, and once she saw how diligent Amelia was, she started giving her more complex work that paid better. By the end of the week, Amelia had earned nearly $6. She'd spent most of it on the boarding house and food, but she had a little left over. More importantly, she'd proven to herself that she could make her own way even in difficult circumstances. On the 7th day after the accident, Amelia made her way back to Dr. Harrison's office for her follow-up appointment. She was dreading seeing him again, remembering how cold he'd been when she first arrived bleeding on his doorstep. But the appointment was necessary, so she steeled herself and knocked on his door. Dr. Harrison looked the same as before, his expression neutral and professional. "Miss Reed, let's see how that arm is healing." He unwrapped the bandages with efficient movements, examining the wound carefully. The stitches had held, and while the area was still red and tender, there was no sign of infection. Amelia held her breath as he probed the area, expecting him to tell her something was wrong. "It's healing well," he said finally, to her relief. "The stitches can come out. This will hurt a bit." He wasn't wrong. Removing the stitches felt like tiny pinpricks of fire along her arm, but Amelia gritted her teeth and endured it. When he was done, the wound looked much better, already starting to scab over and knit together. "Keep it clean for another week," Dr. Harrison instructed, wrapping it in fresh bandages. "After that, you can leave it uncovered. You'll have a scar, but the arm should function normally once it's fully healed." "Thank you," Amelia said, the words coming automatically even though she still resented how he'd treated her that first day. "That'll be $2, the doctor said, holding out his hand. Amelia's heart sank. She'd forgotten about the follow-up fee. She had exactly $1.40 in her pocket, money she'd been carefully saving from her work at the tailor shop. "I don't have $2 right now," she admitted, "but I can bring you the rest in a few days. I'm working at Mrs. Miller's shop and I get paid as I complete projects." Dr. Harrison's expression hardened. "I should have known better than to trust Mr. Quinn's judgment. He vouched for you, said you were good for the debt. Seems he was wrong." "I'm not trying to cheat you," Amelia protested. "I just need a few more days." "I'll pay you everything I owe, I promise." "That's what they all say," the doctor replied coldly. "I want my $2 by the end of this week, or I'll speak to the sheriff about your debt." Amelia felt her face flush with anger and humiliation. She wanted to throw her $1.40 in his face and tell him what she thought of his bedside manner, but she knew that would only make things worse. Instead, she nodded stiffly and left his office, her hands clenched into fists. She was so caught up in her anger and worry that she almost walked right past Brandt, who was tying his horse to the hitching post outside the general store. "Amelia," he called out, and she turned, surprised. She'd thought about him often over the past week, but she hadn't really expected to see him again so soon. "Brandt," she said, feeling suddenly self-conscious. She probably looked a mess with her hair falling out of its pins and dust on her dress from the walk across town. "You're back in Desdemona. Told you I'd check on you," he said with a smile, then his smile faded as he took in her expression. "What's wrong? Is your arm not healing right?" "My arm is fine," Amelia assured him quickly. "The doctor just took out the stitches. He says it should heal completely." "Then why do you look like you want to punch something?" Brandt asked perceptively. Amelia sighed. "Because Dr. Harrison just threatened to report me to the sheriff if I don't pay him $2 by the end of the week for the follow-up appointment. Money I don't have yet." Brandt's expression darkened. "That miserable bastard. I paid him for your treatment. The follow-up should have been included." "Apparently not," Amelia said bitterly. "But it's not your problem. I've been working at the tailor shop all week and I'm earning money. I'll be able to pay him in a few days, just not as quickly as he wants." "How much do you have toward the $2? Brandt asked. $1.40, Amelia admitted. "I need another 60 cents. Brandt reached for his wallet, but Amelia stopped him with her good hand on his arm. "No," she said firmly. "You've done too much already. I can handle this myself. I'll just work extra hard the next few days and get the money together." "Amelia," Brandt said gently, "there's no shame in accepting help when you need it." "I know," she replied. "And I'm grateful for everything you've done. But I need to do this on my own. I need to prove to myself that I can." He studied her face for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her brave words to the fear and desperation underneath. But finally he nodded. "All right, but if you change your mind or if Harrison gives you any trouble, you come find me. I'm staying at the hotel tonight and I'll be in town until tomorrow afternoon." "Why are you staying in town?" Amelia asked, curious. "I thought you'd just come to pick up supplies and head back." "I did," Brandt said, "but I wanted to make sure you were all right. And the ranch is going through a slow period right now, so my boss said I could take a couple days if I needed them." The realization that he'd used his precious time off to check on her made Amelia's chest tighten with emotion. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Wanted to," Brandt replied simply. He glanced at the sun, which was starting its descent toward the horizon. "Have you eaten dinner yet?" "No," Amelia admitted. She'd been planning to buy some bread and cheese from the general store and eat in her room to save money. "Then let me buy you dinner," Brandt said. "And before you say no, it's not charity. I'd just like some company for the meal, and I figure you could tell me more about New Orleans. I've never been that far east." Amelia knew she should refuse. She was already indebted to him for so much, and accepting dinner felt like adding to a debt she could never fully repay. But the truth was that she was tired of eating alone in her room, and the idea of spending an evening with someone who genuinely seemed to enjoy her company was too appealing to resist. "All right," she agreed, "but only if you let me pay you back. Add it to the running total I owe you." Brandt laughed. "You're keeping a list." "Of course I am," Amelia said seriously. "Every penny. I'm going to pay you back in full, Brandt Quinn, even if it takes me a year." "I believe you," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe it too. They walked to the town's only restaurant, a modest establishment called the Dusty Trail that served simple but hearty food. The owner, a heavy-set man named Frank, greeted Brandt by name and led them to a table by the window. "I come through here pretty often," Brandt explained when Amelia raised an eyebrow. "Frank makes the best steak in 3 counties." He wasn't wrong. The meal was delicious, perfectly cooked steak with potatoes and vegetables on the side. Amelia ate slowly, savoring every bite. It had been weeks since she'd had a meal this good, and she couldn't help the small sound of pleasure that escaped her. Brandt grinned. "Good, right? Incredible," Amelia agreed. "Thank you for this." As they ate, they talked. Brandt asked her about New Orleans, and Amelia found herself describing the city in vivid detail. The crowded streets, the mix of languages spoken, the music that seemed to pour from every doorway, the smell of the river and spices and flowers all mixed together. She talked about her parents' small house in the French Quarter, where her mother had taught her to sew, and her father had worked as a clerk for a shipping company. In turn, Brandt told her about his life on the ranch. He described the work with obvious affection. The long days in the saddle, the satisfaction of bringing in a herd safely, the camaraderie among the other cowboys. He talked about his boss, Jim Jefferson, who owned the Double J and treated his workers fairly. He described the Texas landscape, the wide open spaces that seemed to stretch forever, the sunsets that painted the sky in impossible colors. "It sounds beautiful," Amelia said wistfully. "I've never seen anything like that." "Even the journey from New Orleans has been through towns and settled areas mostly." "You should see it sometime," Brandt said. "It's not for everyone. Some people find all that emptiness lonely, but for me it feels like freedom." "I think I'd like it," Amelia said thoughtfully. "I've always felt a bit crowded in cities." They talked until the restaurant began to empty and Frank started giving them pointed looks. Brandt paid the bill over Amelia's protests, and they walked back out into the warm evening air. "Where are you staying?" Brandt asked as they walked down Main Street. "Mrs. Chen's boarding house," Amelia replied. "Same place as before. It's comfortable and Mrs. Chen is kind." "And where are you working?" "You mentioned the tailor shop, Mrs. Miller's place," Amelia confirmed. "I've been doing mending mostly, but she started giving me some dress alterations too. The work pays better, but it takes longer." "Are you going to stay in Desdemona, or are you still planning to go to San Antonio?" Brandt asked the question casually, but Amelia sensed that her answer mattered to him. "I'm not sure anymore," she admitted. "I wrote to my aunt explaining about the accident and the delay. She wrote back and said I'm welcome whenever I can make it, but there's no rush. And the truth is, I've been thinking that maybe I could make a life here. Mrs. Miller mentioned that she might need permanent help. Her arthritis is getting worse, and she can't keep up with all the orders by herself." "So you'd stay in Desdemona," Brandt said, and there was something in his tone that made Amelia's heart skip. "Maybe," she said, looking at him in the fading light. "Would that be all right? I mean, this is clearly a town you pass through regularly." "It would be more than all right," Brandt said quietly. "It would be good, really good." They reached the boarding house too soon. Amelia wasn't ready for the evening to end, but she knew it had to. "Thank you for dinner," she said, "and for checking on me. You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," Brandt replied. "Amelia, I know we haven't known each other long, but I'd like to see you again. Not just as someone checking on an injured stranger, but as friends. Maybe more than friends if you'd be interested in that." Amelia's breath caught. She'd been attracted to Brandt from the moment she'd seen him, but she'd told herself it was just gratitude talking, that she was confusing kindness with deeper feelings. But the truth was that over dinner tonight, she'd realized how much she genuinely liked him. He was kind and thoughtful, but he was also funny and interesting, with a quiet strength that made her feel safe. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like that very much." Brandt's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Good. I'll be back in town next week for supplies." "Can I see you then? Maybe we could have dinner again or take a walk or whatever you'd like." "I'd enjoy that," Amelia said. "And Brandt, thank you for everything. I know I keep saying it, but I mean it. You saved my life and you've been nothing but kind to me. I won't forget that." "You don't need to thank me," Brandt said. "Just promise me you'll take care of yourself. No working too hard and making that arm worse." "I promise," Amelia said. They stood there for a moment longer, neither quite wanting to say goodbye. Then Brandt tipped his hat to her, gave her one last smile, and walked away into the gathering darkness. Amelia watched him go, then went inside, her heart feeling lighter than it had in months. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and healing. Amelia's arm continued to improve, and Mrs. Miller was so pleased with her work that she offered her a permanent position. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and Mrs. Miller even offered to let Amelia take on her own clients on the side if she wanted to earn extra money. Amelia accepted immediately. She wrote to her aunt in San Antonio, explaining the change in plans, and received a warm letter back saying that she understood and wished Amelia all the happiness in her new life. True to his word, Brandt came to town every week. Sometimes he'd arrive on a Wednesday, sometimes on a Saturday, but he always found time to see Amelia. They'd have dinner together, or take walks around town, or sit in the parlor at the boarding house and talk for hours. Mrs. Chen watched these visits with knowing eyes, but she never said anything, just smiled and made sure they had privacy. With each visit, Amelia felt herself falling deeper. Brandt was everything she'd ever wanted in a man. Strong but gentle, confident but humble, hardworking but not so serious that he couldn't laugh and enjoy life. He treated her like an equal, asked her opinions, and listened when she spoke. He encouraged her work at the tailor shop and celebrated her successes with genuine pride, and he was patient. Never once did he push for more than she was ready to give. Their relationship progressed slowly, sweetly. A touch of hands while walking. His arm around her shoulders when they sat together. A gentle kiss goodnight after their third dinner together that left her breathless and wanting more. By early September, 3 months after the stagecoach accident, Amelia knew she was in love. She'd never felt this way before, this absolute certainty that she'd found the person she wanted to spend her life with. But she didn't know how to tell him, or if he felt the same way. He clearly cared for her, but love, that seemed almost too much to hope for. One Saturday evening in mid-September, Brandt took her on a picnic outside of town. He'd borrowed a wagon from the livery and loaded it with a basket of food and a blanket. They drove out to a spot overlooking a small creek, where the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. "This is beautiful," Amelia said as Brandt spread out the blanket and helped her sit down. "How did you find this place?" "I've been exploring the area around Desdemona," Brandt admitted, "looking for the perfect spot to bring you." They ate cold chicken and fresh bread, drank cool cider, and watched the sun sink lower. When the meal was finished, Brandt moved to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Amelia," he said, his voice serious, "I need to tell you something." Her heart started beating faster. "What is it?" "I'm in love with you," Brandt said simply. "I think I have been since that first day when you were so determined to refuse my help even though you clearly needed it. You're brave and strong and kind, and being with you makes me happier than I've ever been. I know we haven't known each other that long, but I'm sure about my feelings. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Amelia felt tears spring to her eyes. "I love you too," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I was so afraid you didn't feel the same way." "I've never felt like this before, Brandt. When I'm with you, everything feels right. Everything feels possible." Brandt cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. "Then say you'll marry me. I know I don't have much to offer right now. I'm just a cowboy with some savings and a lot of ambition. But I promise I'll work hard to give you a good life. I'll work double, triple if I have to." Amelia laughed through her tears, remembering how he'd said almost the exact same thing that first day when he'd offered to pay her medical bills. "You're already working double to pay back the money you spent on me," she reminded him. "And I'd do it again in a heartbeat," Brandt said. "I'd work 100 times over if it meant keeping you safe and happy. So what do you say, Amelia Reed? Will you marry me?" "Yes," Amelia said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." Brandt's whoop of joy echoed across the prairie, and then he was kissing her, deep and thorough and full of promise. Amelia kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her love and hope and dreams into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Brandt reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "I know it's not fancy," he said, "but I wanted to have a ring to give you when I asked." "It's perfect," Amelia said, holding out her left hand. The ring slid on easily, fitting as if it had been made for her. She admired it in the fading light, thinking about how much her life had changed in just 3 months. She'd lost everything in that stagecoach accident, or so she'd thought. But really, she'd found everything. She'd found purpose and community, and most importantly, she'd found love. They stayed by the creek until full darkness fell and the stars came out, talking about their future. Brandt explained that he'd been saving money for years, hoping to buy his own piece of land someday. With what he'd saved, combined with what Amelia had managed to put aside from her work, they might have enough to make a down payment on a small property near the ranch. "I could keep working for Mr. Jefferson while we build up our own herd," Brandt said. and you could keep working at the tailor shop if you wanted, or focus on taking private clients. Whatever makes you happy." "I want to work," Amelia said firmly. "I like having my own money, my own purpose. Maybe eventually I could open my own shop, something bigger than what Mrs. Miller has." "That sounds perfect," Brandt agreed. "We'll build it all together." When he finally drove her back to the boarding house, it was late, but Amelia was too excited to sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ring on her finger, thinking about everything that had happened and everything that was still to come. The next morning, she told Mrs. Chen about the engagement. The older woman smiled broadly, one of the few times Amelia had seen such an unguarded expression on her usually reserved face. "That cowboy," Mrs. Chen said. "He has good heart. You will be happy." "I think so too," Amelia agreed. When she went to work on Monday, Mrs. Miller was equally pleased. "I knew it," she said, examining the ring. "The way that man looked at you, it was only a matter of time. When's the wedding?" "We haven't set a date yet," Amelia admitted. "We need to figure out where we're going to live first." "No rush," Mrs. Miller said. "But when you do get married, I hope you'll still work for me, at least part-time. I've come to depend on you." "I will," Amelia promised. "As long as you need me." Over the next few weeks, Amelia and Brandt made their plans. They decided to have a simple wedding in early November, after the fall cattle drive was finished and Brandt would have more time. They'd get married at the small church in Desdemona, with Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Miller and some of Brandt's friends from the ranch in attendance. For a place to live, Brandt spoke to Mr. Jefferson, who offered them a small cabin on the edge of the ranch property. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but it was theirs, and Mr. Jefferson said they could stay there rent-free as long as Brandt worked for him. "It's not the land of our own that we talked about," Brandt said apologetically when he showed Amelia the cabin. "But it's a start. We can save money faster if we're not paying rent, and in a year or 2, we should have enough for our own place." "It's wonderful," Amelia said sincerely, looking around the dusty but structurally sound cabin. She could already see what it would look like with curtains on the windows, rugs on the floor, and their few possessions making it a home. "We can make this work." They spent their free time fixing up the cabin. Brandt repaired the roof and reinforced the walls while Amelia cleaned and sewed curtains and cushions. Other cowboys from the ranch stopped by to help, curious about the woman who'd caught Brandt's heart. They were a rough but friendly bunch, and they quickly accepted Amelia as one of their own when they saw how hard she worked and how happy she made Brandt. By the time their wedding day arrived in early November, the cabin was ready. The weather cooperated, giving them a clear, crisp day with brilliant blue skies. Amelia wore a dress she'd made herself, simple but elegant, in a soft cream color that complemented her complexion. Mrs. Chen had helped her arrange her hair, weaving in small wildflowers that Brandt had picked that morning. The ceremony itself was short and sweet. The circuit preacher spoke about love and commitment, and Amelia and Brandt exchanged vows in front of their small gathering of friends. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Brandt kissed her with such tenderness that Amelia felt tears spring to her eyes. Afterward, they had a celebration at the boarding house. Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast, and there was music and dancing late into the evening. Amelia danced with Brandt, with Mr. Jefferson, with several of the ranch hands who wanted to congratulate them. She laughed more than she had in years, feeling truly joyful for the first time since her parents had died. Finally, as the evening wound down, Brandt and Amelia said their goodbyes and rode out to their cabin. It was strange and wonderful to be alone with him, to know that this was their life now forever. Brandt carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition, and set her down gently inside their home. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a perfect expression of the love they'd built over the past months. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, Brandt's arm around her shoulders, Amelia's head resting on his chest. "Are you happy?" Brandt asked softly. "So happy," Amelia replied. "I keep thinking about that first day, how desperate and scared I was. I thought my life was over. But really, it was just beginning." "Mine too," Brandt said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, safe and content in their little cabin. The first year of their marriage was full of challenges and joys in equal measure. Amelia continued to work at Mrs. Miller's shop 3 days a week, and she took on private clients the other days, slowly building a reputation as the best seamstress in the area. Brandt worked long hours at the ranch, and true to his word, he often worked extra shifts to build up their savings faster. Money was tight, especially in the beginning, but they managed. Amelia was careful with every penny, making their food stretch and mending their clothes until they couldn't be mended anymore. Brandt proved to be handy around the cabin, making improvements and additions as they could afford the materials. In the spring, Amelia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. A baby would change everything, but they were ready. Or at least, they told themselves they were ready. Amelia continued working as long as she could, finally stopping in her 7th month when Mrs. Miller insisted she rest. The older woman had become like a mother to her, and she fussed over Amelia's health constantly. Their son was born on a warm September evening, exactly 1 year and 3 months after Amelia had first arrived in Desdemona, bleeding and desperate. The birth was long and difficult, but with Mrs. Chen's help, both Amelia and the baby came through healthy. They named him Benjamin Thomas Quinn after both their fathers. He had Brandt's dark hair and Amelia's green eyes, and from the moment they first held him, they were completely in love. "He's perfect," Brandt whispered, staring down at his son with awe. "We made this perfect little person." "We did," Amelia agreed, exhausted but happy beyond words. Benjamin was a good baby, relatively quiet and content as long as he was fed and warm. Amelia adjusted to motherhood with the same determination she'd brought to everything else in her life. It wasn't always easy, balancing the baby with her work and keeping the household running, but she managed. Brandt was a devoted father from the start. He'd come home from long days at the ranch and immediately reach for Benjamin, talking to him and playing with him no matter how tired he was. Watching them together made Amelia's heart swell with love. By the time Benjamin turned 1, Amelia and Brandt had saved enough money to make an offer on a piece of land about 10 miles from the ranch. It was 50 acres of good grazing land with a small creek running through it, perfect for starting their own small cattle operation. The seller was an elderly rancher named Samuel Grant who was moving back east to live with his daughter. He liked Brandt and Amelia, impressed by their hard work and determination, and he gave them a fair price. "This land has been good to me," Mr. Grant said as they signed the papers. "I hope it's good to you too. We'll take care of it," Brandt promised. "Thank you for giving us this chance." They moved onto their own land in the spring of 1886, 3 years after Amelia had first arrived in Desdemona. Brandt built them a small house, just 3 rooms to start, but with plans to expand as they could afford it. They bought a small starter herd of 20 cattle using the last of their savings, and Brandt continued to work part-time at the Double J to bring in steady money while their own operation got established. The work was backbreaking. Amelia had never worked so hard in her life, between caring for Benjamin, helping with the cattle, maintaining their home, and still taking on sewing projects to bring in extra money. There were days when she fell into bed so exhausted she could barely move, and mornings when she woke wondering how she'd find the strength to do it all again. But there were also moments of pure joy. Watching Benjamin take his first steps in the yard of their own home. Sitting on the porch with Brandt in the evenings, watching the sunset over land that belonged to them. Seeing their small herd grow as calves were born. Slowly, gradually, building something that would last. By 1888, their herd had grown to nearly 100 head, and they were turning a real profit. Brandt was able to stop working at the Double J and focus entirely on their own ranch. Amelia had cut back on her sewing work, focusing only on special orders that paid well, so she could devote more time to Benjamin and the ranch. They'd expanded their house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room. It wasn't fancy, but it was comfortable and sturdy, built with Brandt's own hands and Amelia's careful planning. In the fall of that year, Amelia discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news felt less terrifying and more simply exciting. They knew what to expect now, and they were in a much better financial position to support another child. Their daughter was born in May of 1889, an easier birth than Benjamin's had been. They named her Susanna Marie, after Amelia's mother and Brandt's grandmother. She had Amelia's auburn hair and Brandt's blue-gray eyes, and Benjamin was immediately fascinated by his baby sister. Gentle, Amelia reminded him constantly as 4-year-old Benjamin wanted to touch and hold the baby every moment. You have to be very gentle with her. Benjamin nodded seriously, treating his baby sister with elaborate care. He'd bring her his favorite toys and tell her long, rambling stories that she was far too young to understand. Watching them together made both Amelia and Brandt smile. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch continued to prosper, not making them rich but providing a solid, comfortable living. They hired a ranch hand named Miguel Rodriguez to help with the growing herd, a young man from Mexico who proved to be an excellent worker and quickly became part of their extended family. Benjamin grew into a smart, energetic boy who loved helping his father with the ranch work. Susanna was quieter, more thoughtful, but with a stubborn streak that reminded Brandt of Amelia. The 2 children were close despite their age difference, always playing together and looking out for each other. In 1892, Amelia and Brandt celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary. It was hard to believe that a decade had passed since that simple ceremony in Desdemona's church. So much had changed, and yet the core of their relationship remained the same. Love, respect, and the determination to build a good life together. For their anniversary, Brandt surprised Amelia with a trip back to Desdemona. Mrs. Chen had agreed to watch the children for 2 days, giving them a rare opportunity to be alone together. They stayed at the hotel where Brandt had spent that first night after they'd met, and they had dinner at the dusty trail, sitting at the same table by the window where they'd shared their first meal together. You ever think about that day? Brandt asked, reaching across the table to take her hand. The day we met, all the time, Amelia admitted. I was so scared and desperate I thought my life was ending. Instead it was beginning, Brandt said, for both of us. Do you ever regret it? Amelia asked. Taking on someone else's problems, spending money you'd worked so hard to save. Never, Brandt said firmly. Not once. You and the life we've built together, that's worth more than any amount of money. I'd make the same choice 1,000 times over. Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. Even after 10 years, he could still make her feel cherished and loved with just a few words. I love you, she said, more than I can ever express. I love you too, Brandt replied. Always have, always will. The next morning, they visited Mrs. Miller's shop. The older woman was still working, though she'd finally taken on a permanent assistant to help with the physical demands of the job. She greeted Amelia with a warm hug and insisted on showing her all the new fabrics that had just arrived from back east. "Business is good," Mrs. Miller reported. "Better than ever, actually. Your reputation helped establish this shop as the place to go for quality work. I still tell people that the best seamstress I ever knew got her start right here." "You taught me so much," Amelia said gratefully. "You gave me a chance when I needed it most." They also visited Mrs. Chen, who had finally retired from running the boarding house and turned it over to her daughter. She looked older but still sharp as ever, and she insisted on making them tea and hearing all about the children and the ranch. "I knew you two would make it," she said with satisfaction. "From the first time I saw you together, I knew." The visit to Desdemona was bittersweet, bringing back memories of those early, difficult days when everything had been uncertain. But it also reminded Amelia of how far they'd come, how much they'd accomplished through hard work and love and determination. When they returned to the ranch, Benjamin and Susanna ran to greet them, full of stories about their time with Miguel and demanding to know what presents their parents had brought them. Amelia and Brandt laughed and distributed the small gifts they'd purchased, happy to be home with their children. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. There was the year of the drought, when they lost a quarter of their herd and had to take out a loan to get through the winter. There was the year Susanna fell from a horse and broke her arm, terrifying them all but teaching her to be more careful. There was the year Benjamin turned 15 and announced he wanted to go to college back east, surprising them but also making them proud. Through it all, Amelia and Brandt remained partners in every sense of the word. They made decisions together, supported each other through difficulties, and celebrated successes as a team. Their love had matured and deepened over the years, becoming something solid and unshakable. In 1898, 15 years after that fateful stagecoach accident, Amelia sat on the porch of their ranch house and took stock of her life. Benjamin was away at college in Boston, studying agriculture so he could come back and help run the ranch with modern techniques. Susanna, now 9, was inside doing her homework with Miguel's help while he waited out a rainstorm. Brandt came out and sat beside her, automatically reaching for her hand. His hair had started to gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to Amelia, he was as handsome as the day they'd met. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Amelia said. "All the years since we met, all the things we've accomplished. I keep thinking about that day in Desdemona when Dr. Harrison turned me away. At the time, it felt like the worst thing that could have happened. But if he'd treated me right away, I might never have met you." "I've thought about that too," Brandt admitted. "I'm not saying Harrison was right to refuse you care. He wasn't. But I can't help being grateful that I was there that day, that I had the chance to help you." "You did more than help me," Amelia said, squeezing his hand. "You saved me. And then you loved me and built a life with me. You gave me everything I could ever want." "We gave each other everything," Brandt corrected gently. "This life, this family, this ranch, we built it together. I couldn't have done any of it without you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the rain fall on their land, on the home they'd built with their own hands, on the life they'd created from nothing but love and determination. "You know what I realized recently," Amelia said. "I never paid you back. All those years ago, I kept such careful track of every penny I owed you. $17 for the doctor, plus interest I calculated. Another $4 for the boarding house and meals, $21 total. I was going to pay you back in full, but then we started courting and then we got married, and somehow I never did." Brandt laughed, the sound warm and rich. "You paid me back 1,000 times over, Amelia. Every single day of our marriage, you've given me more than I could ever have asked for. You've given me love and children and a home. You've given me a life worth living. $21 doesn't even begin to compare." "Still," Amelia said, smiling, "I like to finish what I start. Consider it paid in full with interest." "Consider it accepted," Brandt agreed. "Though I think I still came out ahead on the deal." Amelia leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling utterly content. She thought about the scared, injured young woman she'd been 15 years ago, bleeding and desperate on a dusty Texas street. She'd thought her life was over, that she'd lost everything. Instead, she'd found everything. She'd found purpose in her work, first at the tailor shop and later in helping build their ranch. She'd found community in Desdemona, making friends who'd become like family. She'd found strength she hadn't known she possessed, the ability to work hard and overcome obstacles and build something lasting. And most importantly, she'd found love. Real, deep, lasting love with a man who'd seen her at her lowest moment and chosen to help without expecting anything in return. A man who'd worked double to pay her medical bills and then worked double again to build them a life together. "What are you thinking now?" Brandt asked, lifting his head to look at her. "That I'm the luckiest woman in Texas," Amelia said simply. "Maybe the luckiest woman in the whole country." "I'm pretty lucky myself," Brandt replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Getting to spend my life with you." Inside, they heard Susanna laugh at something Miguel said, and the sound filled Amelia with joy. This was her life now, this ranch, this family, this love. It was everything she'd never known she wanted, all because a cowboy with a kind heart had refused to walk past someone in need. The rain continued to fall, nourishing their land, and Amelia and Brandt sat together on their porch, hand in hand, watching their dreams grow. In the years that followed, their ranch continued to thrive. Benjamin returned from college with new ideas and techniques that helped them expand their operation. He eventually married a school teacher from Desdemona named Margaret Foster, and they had 3 children who loved spending time on their grandparents' ranch. Susanna grew into a talented artist, much to everyone's surprise. She studied painting in San Antonio and eventually opened a small gallery in Desdemona, selling landscapes of the Texas prairie to tourists and collectors. She married late, at 30, to a doctor named James Patterson who'd moved to Desdemona to set up practice. The irony of Susanna marrying a doctor was not lost on anyone, especially given how her parents had met. "At least he's nothing like Harrison," Brandt had said when they first met James. Dr. Harrison had long since left Desdemona, driven out by his poor reputation, and replaced by a younger physician who believed in treating everyone regardless of their ability to pay. As Amelia and Brandt grew older, they gradually handed over more of the ranch's daily operations to Benjamin and his wife, though they remained involved and active as long as they were able. They were blessed with good health well into their 60s, still taking morning rides together around their property, and still sitting on their porch in the evenings to watch the sunset. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, their entire family gathered for a celebration. Benjamin and Margaret were there with their 3 children. Susanna and James came with their 2 sons. Even Miguel, who'd been with them for over 20 years, joined the celebration with his own wife and children. They had a feast in the expanded ranch house, now a sprawling structure with 8 bedrooms and all the modern conveniences they could afford. After dinner, Benjamin stood up to make a toast. 30 years ago, he said, looking at his parents with love and respect, Two people met under the worst possible circumstances. Ma was injured and desperate. Pa was a cowboy with not much more than a good heart and a willingness to help. Nobody would have blamed them if they'd gone their separate ways after that first crisis was over. But they didn't. They chose each other, and they chose to build a life together. And because of that choice, all of us are here today. This family, this ranch, this legacy, it all started because one man saw someone in need and decided to help, no questions asked. Pa, Ma, thank you for showing us what real love looks like. Thank you for building something that will last for generations. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when he finished. Amelia looked at Brandt, seeing tears on his weathered cheeks, and knew her own face was wet as well. She stood up and took his hand, pulling him to his feet. "We couldn't have done any of this without all of you," Amelia said, looking around at their children, grandchildren, and the extended family they'd built over the years. "You've all made our lives richer and fuller than we ever imagined possible. Thank you for being part of this journey with us." They celebrated late into the evening, with music and dancing and stories. The grandchildren begged to hear again the story of how their grandparents had met, and Amelia and Brandt obliged, taking turns telling the tale of the stagecoach accident, the doctor's refusal, and the cowboy's offer that had changed everything. Later, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Amelia and Brandt sat together on their porch one more time. It had become their ritual over the years, this quiet time together at the end of each day. 30 years, Amelia mused. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean, Brandt agreed. Sometimes I still feel like that young cowboy who saw a pretty woman in distress and knew he had to help. Other times, I look at our grandchildren and realize just how much time has actually passed. "Do you have any regrets?" Amelia asked, not because she doubted his answer but because she wanted to hear it. "None," Brandt said firmly. "Every choice I made, every sacrifice, every moment of hard work, it was all worth it. You, our children, this life we built, that's my legacy. That's what matters." "Mine too," Amelia said softly. She thought about that desperate, injured young woman she'd been so long ago and the strong, accomplished woman she'd become. "I wish I could go back and tell my younger self that everything was going to work out. That the worst day of her life was actually the beginning of the best thing that would ever happen to her." "She wouldn't have believed you," Brandt said with a smile. "She was too stubborn and independent to believe in fairy tale endings." "You're right," Amelia agreed, laughing. "I had to learn to accept help, to let someone else share my burdens. That was probably the hardest lesson of all." "Worth learning, though," Brandt said. "We're always stronger together than we are apart." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the stars come out one by one in the vast Texas sky. Amelia thought about all the years that had passed, all the challenges they'd faced, all the joys they'd shared. It hadn't always been easy, but it had always been worth it. Brandt and Amelia lived well into their 80s, a blessing in a time when many people didn't live past 60. They remained on the ranch, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, active and engaged in the family business until their final years. Brandt passed first, in his sleep one winter night, peacefully and without pain. He was 84 years old, and he died in the bed he'd shared with Amelia for over 50 years, in the house he'd built with his own hands on land they'd worked together to purchase and maintain. Amelia grieved deeply but not desperately. They'd had so many years together, so much love and happiness, that she couldn't truly be sad. She missed him terribly, missed his presence and his voice and his touch, but she also felt grateful for every moment they'd shared. She lived another 3 years, spending her time with her family, painting alongside Susanna and sharing stories with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She never left the ranch, never wanted to. It was home, filled with memories of the life she and Brandt had built together. When Amelia passed at 87, also peacefully in her sleep, the family buried her next to Brandt on a hill overlooking their property. The whole community turned out for the funeral, testament to the lives both Amelia and Brandt had lived and the impact they'd had on everyone around them. Benjamin and Margaret took over the ranch completely, running it according to the principles his parents had established. The Quinn Ranch became known throughout Texas as a model of good management and fair treatment of workers, a place where hard work was rewarded and family came first. Years later, when Benjamin's grandchildren asked him about their great-grandparents, he would tell them the story. He described the stagecoach accident, the doctor's refusal, and the cowboy who'd offered to work double to pay a stranger's medical bills. He'd tell them how that single act of kindness had led to a love story that lasted over 50 years and created a family that would endure for generations. "That's who we are," Benjamin would say. "We're the family that believes in helping others, in working hard, in building something that lasts. We're the family that Brandt Quinn and Amelia Reed created when they chose love over fear, partnership over independence, and faith over doubt. And that legacy is yours to carry forward." The story became family legend, passed down through the generations. The old ranch house was preserved and eventually turned into a family museum, filled with Amelia's sewing work, Brandt's ranch tools, and Susanna's paintings of the land their parents had loved. The Quinn Ranch itself continued to operate for over 100 years, eventually becoming a historical landmark. Visitors would come to see the place where a cowboy and a seamstress had built their American dream, proving that love and hard work could overcome any obstacle. And it all started with a simple choice: to help someone in need, to work double if necessary, to believe that one person's kindness could change another person's life. In the end, that's exactly what happened. Brandt's kindness saved Amelia's life that day on the dusty street in Desdemona. But Amelia's love saved Brandt's life too, giving him purpose and family and a reason to build something lasting. They saved each other, and in doing so, they created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Their story became a reminder that even in the hardest times, even in the roughest places, love can flourish. All it takes is one person willing to extend a hand and another person brave enough to take it. That was the true story of Brandt Quinn and Amelia Reed, the cowboy and the seamstress, the man who worked double and the woman who paid him back in love. It was a simple story in many ways, but it was also everything. A testament to the power of kindness, the strength of commitment, and the enduring nature of true love. And so their story ended not with sadness but with celebration, not with regret but with gratitude, not with an ending at all but with a new beginning for every generation that came after them. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind something beautiful. What more could anyone ask for? Their legacy lived on in their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, and all the generations that followed. The Quinn Ranch stood as a monument to what two people could build when they chose each other, worked together, and refused to give up even when times were hard. And somewhere, in the vast Texas sky that stretched over the land they'd loved, Brandt and Amelia were together again, watching over the family they'd created and the legacy they'd left behind, forever intertwined, forever in love, forever home.